Thank you for joining us for the St. Louis Metropolitan Pandemic Task Force Daily Briefing with Dr. Alex Garza. The briefing will begin momentarily. We will take questions submitted by members of the media after making brief remarks. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Alex Garza.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you all for tuning in for today's briefing. Now, a couple days have passed, and there's been a lot of new developments about the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine, and I'd like to spend at least a couple of minutes at the top of the briefing talking about what the news means and how it could impact our vaccination efforts within our region. So, as most of you know, this week the CDC and the FDA recommended that the U.S. pause the use of Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine because of concerns about potential connections between the vaccine and an extremely rare but serious form of blood clots, and in particular a specific type of blood clot called cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, or CVST. Now, as a result of this, Missouri and Illinois have halted the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well. Now, the current supply of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will be stored until the FDA and the CDC can further investigate these cases, which could take as little as a few days, but could last up until a couple of weeks. Now, a couple of things about this pause. So this is a normal process for drugs and vaccines to undergo to investigate potential side effects or things not seen during vaccine trials. So what this does is it shows that the system is working to protect the citizens from harm that could come about because of newly released drugs and vaccines. So here's also a little bit more context on the issue. First, from the data that has so far been presented, these blood clots are still extremely rare, and there has not been evidence as of yet to say that it's been caused by the vaccine. So that's what this pause is for. Now, at this time, there's been 6 cases of blood clots reported in the United States on close to 7 million doses administered of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So based on those numbers, the risk is really less than 1 in a million of having this serious side effect. So to put that into a little bit of perspective, around 1 in 10,000 women will develop blood clots during pregnancy. About 1 in 1,000 people will develop blood clots from air travel. And more importantly, you're much more likely to develop these blood clots from COVID. Now, in a paper in the journal Thorax, the prevalence of pulmonary embolus, or clot in the lung, in COVID patients was around 7.8%. And a deep vein thrombosis, which is a big blood clot in a leg or something like that, was found in around 11% of those patients. And therefore, the risk of clots is much higher from infection from COVID-19 compared to what we currently know about the vaccine. So investigating these potential extremely rare issues can and does happen with new vaccines and medications delivered to over millions of people. But that's why we have these reporting systems, so that regulators can take these pauses and take a closer look. So now a little bit more information about the vaccine and our region. So to date, approximately 30,000 doses of the J&J vaccine have been used in Region C. Now, as of now, there has been no reported cases of blood clots associated with the vaccine throughout the state of Missouri. Now, just to review who these cases were in the United States, they were all female. The ages were 18 to 48 years old, and they occurred between day 6 and day 13 post-vaccination, so fairly soon after vaccination. So now, if you're one of those people that has received a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, you should be aware of some of the symptoms to watch out for, just like with any other medication. So you should call your healthcare provider if you experience things like a severe headache, leg pain, leg swelling, chest pain, or shortness of breath. Now, it also appears that if there is a causal link with the vaccine, that the problems show up, as I said, fairly soon after you've been vaccinated. So certainly if you're 2 and 3 months out from being vaccinated, the risk is really, really low that having a symptom such as a severe headache would be related to the vaccine. But nonetheless, contact your healthcare provider if you have any questions about that. So pausing or stopping vaccination with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will have some impact on vaccine uptake or vaccination numbers within our region. However, we're still trying to figure out how significant that will be. And the reason why I say that is that that vaccine accounts for a pretty small amount of total vaccine that is being delivered here in Region C. It's around 3 to 4% in our region. Most of the vaccinators have been using Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, and we expect that supply of vaccines to continue and possibly increase as time goes on. So that's a little bit about the vaccine status for Johnson & Johnson. Now let's look at total doses administered. With that, the overall status of vaccine distribution in our region looks like this. We have over 1 million total doses have been delivered in Region C. And that includes around 691,000 first doses and 436,000 second doses. Now these numbers are a little bit conservative, as I've mentioned previously, and that's because there's still some catch-up data processing that has to occur in the Show Me Vax data site. And there's also doesn't include data from federal vaccinations as well. So think about things like the VA or other sources of vaccination. So this is really sort of a really conservative number. This is the minimum of the vaccinations that have occurred in Region C. And the actual number is higher than this. A couple of other things that I wanted to share about vaccinations and admissions. So there's been some question about how has this translated then into what we're seeing in the hospitals. And so I included a couple of slides when we take a look at our data with our analytics team week over week to see what the changes are occurring. And this one shows the distribution of age by admission week. And so if you track along with these different blocks in there, so those all represent percentages of different age cohorts, starting at 75 and then going down to 65, 40 to 65, and then 0 to 40. And so as you can see, that percentage of 75-year-olds has decreased significantly since really the height of the pandemic back in December. Where you're seeing the most growth now as far as a percentage of the total is really that 40 to 65-year age cohort. So it has definitely changed over time, and that's most likely related to vaccination status. So less older people are being admitted, more younger people are being admitted to the hospital. An interesting thing, though, if you break this out by race, there's a little bit of a different picture. So on the left-hand side is Black African American, broken out by age cohorts as well. And you can see there's a larger percentage now of that 0 to 40 age range that is making up the admissions for COVID-19. Whereas on the right-hand side, which is the white cohort, you can see that most of that percentage is now being made up by that 40 to 65-year age cohort. Both of them, though, have seen a decline in that 75-year age cohort. So what this leads us to believe is that the vaccination strategy of vaccinating oldest people first is having an effect on admissions to the hospital. So even though I'm going to show you some admission numbers here, showing you where we're sort of plateauing, who makes up that total is a little bit different than where we were 3 and 4 months ago. I did also wanted to include this slide as well, and this is about vaccinations. So this is vaccinations broken out by age cohort as well as by county. And so the way to look at this is the older cohorts are on that far right-hand side, and the green bars represent first dose and completed series. So as you can see, on that 75-year plus age cohort across the board, that's been the majority of people who have completed their vaccinations or have had their first dose. Then it's the 65-year-olds, and then you can see it tail off after that 65-year-old age cohort. Now this data was pulled about a week ago, so we know that there's been some mass vaccination campaigns that have been ongoing, so these numbers are going to change. And also remember that this is data from the state, and it's lagging, and it doesn't include the federal data. So again, these are very conservative estimates. But I think, you know, it explains who's been getting vaccinated out in the community as well. And then this is just another slide that combines the 75 and then a 65-year-old cohort. And so it shows that this makes up the majority of people that have been vaccinated within our region across the board. So vaccination sites continue within Region C, even despite you know, the pullback of J&J. There's still a lot of vaccination sites going on. I saw something on the Post-Dispatch website about 1,600 slots being opened across the county, and we all know that the FEMA sites are still running downtown. So still a fair number of sites are offering vaccinations across the region. So take a look at your public health websites. A lot of them have open scheduling now. A lot of the healthcare systems now are doing open scheduling. And of course, you can go to the COVID vaccination website for the state to get some more details, and that's at covidvaccine.mo.gov/events. And so that's covidvaccine.mo.gov/events. Okay, so enough about vaccines. Let's move on to some hospital data. This is the regular data that we share with everybody. So this is our admissions data, and again, it's lagged for 2 days. The admission number we're reporting today is 45, with our 7-day moving average of around 40. And as you can see from the graph, we're still hovering. We've been hovering around that 40 mark really since the beginning, first week of March. So some days we go down, some days we come up, but it seems to be hovering right around that 40 mark. As far as hospitalizations are concerned, same story, 221 people in the hospital today with COVID-19. Our 7-day moving average is around 226, and the curve closely resembles our admissions curve. We haven't seen significant drops. Some days we can get below 200, but other days we come back up, but still hovering right around that 220 mark. A little bit more detail about our COVID numbers. As I said, 221 hospitalizations today, 53 patients in the intensive care unit, and 28 patients on ventilators. Looking at some of our suspected COVID numbers, we're reporting 29 patients hospitalized today with suspected COVID, 4 suspected in the intensive care unit, and 2 on ventilators. Our discharges, we discharged 36 COVID patients from task force hospitals yesterday. Our cumulative total is now over 21,000 patients discharged from our hospitals. And again, big thank you to all of our healthcare providers and the people that support them to get these people home. Unfortunately, we still have people passing away from COVID as well. So today we're reporting 4 deaths from yesterday, and that puts our moving average at 3 deaths per day. Moving on now to share some of our modeling data. No change from last week with our modeling. It seems to be tracking well with the model that was updated 2 weeks ago, which is, you know, it's good that it's following the model. It's bad because this model has a prolonged tail on it, and so we certainly like to see that go down. Hopefully with vaccinations continuing, and if people continue to do mitigation strategies, we can get this curve turned down again. Just really briefly, the epi curve for the region pretty much mirrors our admissions data. It's either flat or slightly increasing, but nothing remarkable. And then that's similar for most of the counties around the region. They're either flat or slightly increasing. We've seen the same thing with our positivity rate, which I'll show you here in a minute. Okay, so moving on to our report card now. So as you can see here, good news is that the percentage of patients in our hospitals are in the green zone. So about 5% of total beds occupied by COVID and about 8.5% of ICU beds occupied by COVID. We'd like to see that come down even further, but certainly we're happy to be in the green zone. We've already talked about the rolling average, right around 40. Certainly would like for that to come down as well. Prevalence of cases still hovering around 2. I think it was around 2 last week when we did our report. Again, this is a sum of the past 14 days. So you have to have fewer numbers coming in, drop off some high numbers to get this number down. So certainly we'd welcome seeing that number come down. Our weekly change is around 4. You can see the graph there. It's bouncing up and down depending upon the cases that have been reported over the previous 14 days. And so certainly would like to see that number come down as well. And then I mentioned our positivity rate, and this is for the healthcare systems, is sitting around 10%. You can see it came up over the past month and a half. Now is pretty flat at around that 10% mark. And again, would certainly like to see that come down as well. And our reproductive number is above 1. It's consistent with what we're seeing with all of our other data, with cases either flat or increasing. This would come down when we see case numbers starting to come down as well. So hopefully we can get that turning downward as well. Okay, that finishes my remarks for our update, and now we'll see what questions we have from the media.
How will the J&J pause affect vaccine availability in the St. Louis region?
You know, so as I mentioned, it doesn't make up a huge amount of vaccine within the region. When you take the total amount of vaccine that's in the region, it's still not a significant amount. Now, what it does do, though, is it doesn't make vaccination as convenient. So anytime you have more vaccine out in the community, you can open it up to more people that can do vaccination, such as pharmacies and things like that. And so it could have an impact on the rate that we vaccinate people if you have fewer people that are able to do the vaccination. And so I think that's going to be the challenge. But as I mentioned before, there's available vaccination slots in the county. We know about all of the vaccinations going on within St. Louis City. I would say contact your public health department or the healthcare systems. The healthcare systems have opened up scheduling to open scheduling. I spoke with our team this morning, and we still had open slots. And so I do think that there's enough vaccine until the FDA and the CDC come to a conclusion about J&J, where it's not going to inhibit it that much. But we'll see.
Are you concerned about the impact the J&J news will have on vaccine hesitancy?
Yes, I am. You know, there was always a some degree of hesitancy that was out there already, and this pause certainly doesn't help with that. Now, it was a completely appropriate pause for the FDA and the CDC to look at the data, and that's what their job is to monitor, to make sure there was nothing serious going on with the vaccine. And this has occurred with other vaccines throughout our history. And so I think, you know, to me, what it says is it should reinforce confidence in the system that does the evaluations for a vaccine, and should instill confidence, you know, depending upon what the outcome is, that people are that are looking out for these things. So we'll see what they come back with here after they've done with their review, and we'll go from there. But it certainly doesn't help. But you know, it does, you know, highlight that there is a robust system behind this vaccine to show that people are looking out for the safety of the public.
It looks like COVID cases are increasing throughout the St. Louis region. According to our data, about 400 new cases a day, up 10% from last week. Does this increase seem significant to task force officials, and do you expect numbers to keep rising?
Yeah, so the reason why it's significant is because it tells us, and I think I show that in virtually all of the data, that the virus is still circulating out in the community, so it's not slowing down. So we know it's circulating. So that does give you cause for concern. Certainly, we don't want to happen here what's occurring in places like Michigan, right, where they're now really into their fourth wave. We haven't seen that dramatic rise, though. Certainly there has been some rise. And as I showed in our admissions data, it's a different group of people that are now getting admitted to the hospital. But we haven't seen, it's been more of a flattening of admissions more so than an increase in admissions. And so sometimes, some days it will bounce up farther than others, but there hasn't been a consistent and sustained rise. And so really it's just randomness on how many admissions we're having on any given day, or how many people we have in the hospital on any given day. Certainly it's a little bit of a different cohort, but again, this reinforces that we need to get transmission down, which means vaccinations, continuing vaccinations, but also continuing mitigation strategies. And it makes it really hard to advocate for loosening, public health restrictions when you have continued transmission and when your cases are going up. You really need to have cases coming down, and you need to have suppression of transmission within the community in order to really have a serious discussion about those.
Do you think we may be close to hitting a wall when it comes to vaccinations, as in have most people who wanted a vaccine received one?
Yeah, difficult question to answer. Early on we were playing catch up because of the supply issues. We do seem to have now adequate supply, and so it's as I've said, we have open slots now, and so it seems like supply is there for people who want to get vaccinated. Now, understand that there's other things that go into that. So if people have transportation issues and things like that, and so certainly we have to explore many other avenues to get a lot of people vaccinated that want to get vaccinated. The second piece to that is, we still haven't vaccinated that under 16 age cohort. So hopefully Pfizer has submitted their data to the FDA to expand the EUA to that 12 to 15-year-old age cohort. Hopefully they will approve that, and so that'll be another group of people that will need to get vaccinated. So I think, we'll know more as time goes on where we are with the percentage that have been vaccinated out in the community. So I'm guessing by this time next month that we'll have a much better handle on this is how many people have been vaccinated, this is what the hesitancy looks like, and then focus efforts on getting more people vaccinated.
Are the rising case numbers associated with rising hospitalizations, or are we seeing fewer hospitalizations because the cases are among younger people?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, it certainly decrease in hospitalizations from earlier this year, plateauing, but that cohort is a younger cohort now, especially if you break it up by race, and so it's a different type of patient that's now being hospitalized. So less of the older cohort that are very sick, more of the younger cohort. And so you always want to take into account, okay, if the cases are rising, what does that really mean for hospitalizations and for census and things like that? And so we're not seeing that, sort of one-for-one rise. If there's a percentage of rise in cases, are we seeing that percentage of rise in admissions? So we're not exactly seeing that. But it is a different type of patient that is being admitted.
Can you give the latest update on how all of the hospital systems are now scheduling COVID-19 vaccinations?
Yeah, so I can only speak definitively for SSM. So SSM has opened up scheduling for really anybody that wants to get vaccine 16 and older. The other systems I know have been opening up their availability as well, but I'm not positive on whether everybody is doing open scheduling. I know most people were moving in that direction, but I'm not sure exactly where everybody is right now.
How are hospital systems trying to encourage or improve vaccination rates locally?
Yeah, so I'm working with multiple different partners, so whether that's with our federally qualified healthcare centers or with local businesses, school districts, things like that, to explore different avenues on how we can get more vaccine out into the community. And so there's multiple different paths, some church leaders, various other sort of community sponsors to get more vaccine out into the community. As I mentioned before, not everybody has transportation to make it to one of our clinics, things like that, and so exploring ways on how we can go out into the community and put on vaccination events really across the board.
That concludes the list of questions received from members of the media prior to today's briefing. Thanks for watching.